The attorney said, "This inheritance comes from your sister Eleanor," and I felt my breath catch in my throat. "That's impossible," I said, trembling. "Eleanor died as a baby 50 years ago." When the attorney placed the photograph on his desk, my knees nearly gave out. The elderly woman in the picture was definitely my sister, and everything I had been told throughout my entire life was a lie. I sat there in the plush leather chair, staring at the photo, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't even reach out to touch it. The woman had our mother's eyes and our father's prominent nose. Her hair, though white now, was styled the same way I remembered my mother wearing hers. But most telling of all was the small birthmark near her right eye, identical to the one my baby sister had been born with. "Mrs. Wilson," the attorney, Mr. Johnson, said gently, "I understand this must be shocking for you, but the DNA tests confirm it. Eleanor Prescott was your biological sister." "But my parents," I stammered, barely able to form a coherent thought. "They told me she died of pneumonia when she was only 6 months old. We even visited her grave every year." Mr. Johnson pushed a folder across his desk. "I'm afraid there was a deliberate deception. Your sister Eleanor was given up for adoption shortly after her birth. She only discovered her true identity 5 years ago and had been trying to find you ever since." "Then why didn't she just come to me?" I asked, anger suddenly bubbling up through my confusion. "Why wait until after her death?" The attorney's expression grew somber. "She was afraid. The circumstances of her adoption were complicated. She wanted to be certain before approaching you. Unfortunately, she passed away from heart failure 3 months ago before she could gather the courage." I leafed through the folder. Birth certificates, adoption papers, DNA test results, and several more photographs of Eleanor at different ages. A whole life I never knew existed. A sister I had mourned, but who had been alive all this time. "There's more, Mrs. Wilson," the attorney, Mr. Johnson, said gently. "Your sister amassed considerable wealth during her lifetime. As her only living relative, you are the sole beneficiary of her estate, valued at approximately $7 million. $7 million. The number seemed meaningless compared to the revelation that my sister had been alive all these years. What other secrets had my parents kept from me? And why would they lie about something so profound? As I left the attorney's office that day, clutching the folder to my chest, I felt like I was walking in a dream. The busy streets of Boston seemed surreal around me. My entire childhood, the story of my family, everything I thought I knew had been built on a foundation of lies. That evening, when I sat in my small apartment looking through Eleanor's photographs, I discovered a sealed envelope at the bottom of the folder. Inside was a handwritten letter from my sister, dated just weeks before her death. The first line made my heart stop. "Dear Martha, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to tell you the truth about our family, but not in time to tell you in person. What truth could be so terrible that my parents would fake the death of their own daughter? Little did I know opening this letter would lead me down a path that would uncover a secret so dark it would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about my family."
I stared at Eleanor's handwriting, so similar to my own that it sent a chill down my spine. The letter continued. "Our parents didn't give me up because they didn't want me. They gave me up to protect both of us from a danger that threatened our entire family." My hands trembled as I read on, each word more unbelievable than the last. According to Eleanor, our father, Thomas Wilson, hadn't been the honest businessman I'd always believed him to be. He had been involved with some dangerous people, loan sharks and organized crime figures who used his accounting firm to launder money in the late 1950s. When I was born in 1960, Eleanor wrote, Dad was trying to break away from these connections. He had gone to the police, agreed to testify, But these men threatened to harm his family, to harm us, Martha. Mom and Dad made the heartbreaking choice to fake my death and place me with a distant relative in Chicago, giving me a new identity to keep me safe. I had to put the letter down, my vision blurring with tears. All those years visiting a fake grave, my mother's annual breakdown on what we called Eleanor's Day, it hadn't been grief for a dead child. It had been grief for a living daughter she could never see again. The next morning, I called Mr. Johnson and demanded more information. I need to know everything, I insisted. Where did Eleanor live? Who raised her? Did she have children? I need to know if I have nieces or nephews out there. Mr. Johnson agreed to meet me for coffee at a small cafe near my apartment. He arrived carrying a larger briefcase this time, filled with more documents. Eleanor was raised by your mother's cousin, Margaret Fuller, and her husband in Chicago, he explained, sliding a family photograph across the table. They renamed her Caroline Fuller. She never had children, but she was married briefly in her 30s. I studied the photograph of a young Eleanor, Caroline, standing between an older couple I vaguely recognized from a family reunion decades ago. The resemblance to our mother was unmistakable. Did she know? I asked. Did she grow up knowing she was adopted? Mr. Johnson nodded. She was told when she turned 18. Margaret thought she deserved to know the truth, but she was also warned never to try to contact your family because it could still be dangerous. Dangerous? After all these years? I scoffed. Our father died 15 years ago, and these supposed criminals would be elderly or dead by now. The attorney's expression grew grave. Mrs. Wilson, I don't think you understand. Your sister began searching for you 5 years ago. 3 months after she hired a private investigator, her house was broken into. Nothing was taken, but her files were clearly searched. I felt a cold dread spreading through me. Are you saying? 2 weeks before her death, Eleanor called me in a panic. She believed she was being followed. The medical examiner ruled her death as heart failure, but... But what? I demanded. Eleanor had left instructions that if anything happened to her, I was to wait 3 months and then contact you. She was afraid that whoever was watching her might come after you too. As Mr. Johnson's words sank in, an elderly man at a nearby table caught my eye. He had been there when I arrived, seemingly absorbed in his newspaper. But now I noticed he hadn't turned a page in all the time we'd been talking, and he seemed to be sitting just close enough to overhear our conversation. When we met our eyes, he quickly looked away, folded his newspaper, and stood to leave. That's when I saw a small tattoo on his wrist, partially visible beneath his sleeve. A spiderweb design. The exact same tattoo Eleanor had described in her letter as the mark of the criminal organization our father had betrayed. I realized, with growing horror, that the danger hadn't passed. It had just found a new target. Me.
"Don't look now," I whispered to Mr. Johnson, "but I think we're being watched." I discreetly described the man with the spiderweb tattoo who had just left the cafe. The attorney's face paled. "We should leave. Separately. Go somewhere public, crowded." He hastily gathered the documents, shoving them back into his briefcase. "I'll call you tonight to arrange a safer meeting place." As I walked briskly toward the busy shopping district downtown, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were following my every move. I ducked into a department store, weaving through clothing racks and taking the elevator up and down several times before finally exiting through a different door. Only then did I hail a taxi to take me home. Back in my apartment, I double-locked the door and drew the curtains. My hands still shaking, I returned to Eleanor's letter, skipping ahead to find answers. I've spent decades researching what happened, Eleanor had written. Dad was helping the FBI build a case against the Donnelly crime family. They specialized in financial crimes, but weren't above murder to protect their interests. After Dad testified, the organization's leader, Victor Donnelly, was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He died there in 1993, but his son Raymond vowed to avenge his father. Raymond's signature is a spider web tattoo on his wrist. He marks all his loyal men the same way. I nearly dropped the letter. The man from the cafe had that exact tattoo. Eleanor continued, I believe Raymond has been searching for both of us for years, not for revenge, but because Dad hid something from them, evidence of other crimes or perhaps money, something valuable enough that they're still looking decades later. A knock at my door made me jump. I crept silently to the peephole and relaxed slightly when I saw my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy. Martha, dear, she called through the door, I've brought you some of that banana bread you like. I opened the door, grateful for the normal interaction. Mrs. Abernathy had been my neighbor for nearly 20 years, a kind widow who often shared her baking. Thank you, I said, accepting the foil-wrapped loaf. Would you like to come in for tea? Oh, I wish I could, but my nephew is visiting. Such a nice man, helping me with some repairs. Maybe another time. As she turned to go, I caught a glimpse of a man waiting by her apartment door down the hall. My blood froze. Though he was partially in shadow, I could swear it was the same man from the cafe. I closed and locked my door, heart pounding. Mrs. Abernathy didn't have a nephew. She'd often told me how she regretted never having children or nieces and nephews, which meant the man with her was an imposter. Had he threatened her to gain access to my building? My phone rang, startling me further. It was Mr. Johnson. Mrs. Wilson, I've arranged for a security consultant to meet us tomorrow. In the meantime, do you have somewhere else you can stay tonight? Somewhere not associated with you? I think that might be a good idea, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I peered through the peephole again. The hallway was empty now. The man from the cafe, I think he's in my building. Pack a bag, Mr. Johnson instructed firmly. I'll send a car for you in 20 minutes. Don't tell anyone where you're going. After hanging up, I moved quickly, throwing essentials into a small suitcase. As I packed, I found myself staring at a photograph on my nightstand, my parents on their 40th wedding anniversary. Had they lived with this fear every day? Had they always been looking over their shoulders, expecting Raymond Donnelly or his men to appear? And the most pressing question of all, what had my father hidden that was worth killing for after all these years? As I prepared to leave the only home I'd known for 2 decades, I noticed a small red light blinking from behind my bookshelf. Moving closer, I discovered something that sent ice through my veins. A tiny camera, expertly hidden among my books. Someone had been watching me in my own home. How long had they been observing me? What had they seen? And most importantly, how much did they know about what I had learned?
The car Mr. Johnson sent was an unmarked black sedan with tinted windows. The driver, a stern-faced woman who introduced herself only as Kate, drove evasively, taking random turns and doubling back several times to ensure we weren't followed. "Where are we going?" I asked as we left the familiar streets of my neighborhood behind. "Somewhere safe," Kate replied curtly. "Mr. Johnson has arranged a secure location. The less you know about it beforehand, the better." An hour later, we arrived at a modest cabin on the outskirts of a small lakeside community. Kate checked the perimeter before allowing me inside, where Mr. Johnson was waiting with another man, tall, muscular, with the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to looking for threats. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Michael Reeves," Mr. Johnson said. "He's a security specialist and former FBI agent. He's going to help us make sense of all this." Michael nodded a greeting. "I've been briefed on your situation. I'm sorry about your sister." His voice was unexpectedly gentle for such an imposing figure. We gathered around the kitchen table, where Mr. Johnson spread out the contents of his briefcase: Eleanor's documents, photographs, and several files I hadn't seen before. "Eleanor hired me a year ago," Michael explained. "She was convinced she was being watched and wanted protection while she continued her investigation." "Investigation into what, exactly?" I asked. Michael exchanged glances with Mr. Johnson. "Into what your father might have hidden from the Donnelly family. Eleanor believed it was the key to ending this threat once and for all." He produced a manila folder and opened it to reveal photographs of my childhood home, the modest 2-story house in Bridgeport where I'd grown up. "Your father sold this house 2 years after faking Eleanor's death. It's changed hands several times since then, but Eleanor tracked down the current owners and, posing as a historical preservationist, gained access for a tour last year." "What was she looking for?" I asked. She wasn't entirely sure, but she had this. He pulled out a faded piece of paper, a child's drawing of our old house with strange markings in the basement. I gasped. "I drew this. I must have been 5 or 6 years old." Michael nodded. "Eleanor found it among your mother's possessions after she died. Look at these marks in the basement. Your mother had written a note on the back, 'Martha's Imaginary Treasure Map.' I remember now. I was convinced there was hidden treasure in our basement. Dad used to play along, helping me hunt for it. Your father may have been hiding something in plain sight, using your childhood game as cover." "The house has been renovated several times," Mr. Johnson interjected. "Whatever might have been hidden there is likely long gone." "Maybe, maybe not," Michael said. "Eleanor believed that what your father hid wasn't something large, maybe documents, microfilm, or a safe deposit key, something that could be concealed inside a wall or under floorboards." "But why would the Donnellys still be looking after all this time? What could possibly be worth this much effort decades later?" Michael's expression grew serious. "Before your father went to the FBI, he was the Donnellys' accountant for nearly a decade. He would have known every detail of their financial operations, including offshore accounts, shell companies, and hidden assets worth millions. Eleanor believed that your father kept insurance, records of all their crimes, perhaps, or access to money that was never recovered. I tried to reconcile this image with the quiet, loving father I remembered. Had he really been involved with such dangerous people? Had he stolen from them? The father I knew had worked hard, lived modestly, and taught me the value of honesty." "There's something else," Michael said, interrupting my thoughts. He pulled out a newspaper clipping just 2 months ago. "This is why we think the threat has escalated." The headline read, "Raymond Donnelly released after serving 25 years. Below was a photograph of an older man with cold eyes and a familiar spiderweb tattoo on his wrist. "Raymond was arrested for separate crimes in the late 1990s, Michael explained. "He's been in prison all this time, running his operation from the inside. But now he's out, and his first order of business seems to be finding whatever your father took." A chill ran through me as I stared at Raymond Donnelly's face. This was the man who had pursued my sister to her death, and now he was coming for me. "What if I don't want any part of this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if I just walk away from the inheritance, forget everything I've learned?" Michael shook his head grimly. "It's too late for that. They know about you now. They'll assume you have what they want, or at least know where to find it." That night, as I lay awake in the cabin's small bedroom, I heard a car approaching on the gravel driveway. Michael's voice rose in urgent conversation, followed by the sound of a door opening. Peering through the curtains,
I saw Kate helping someone from her car, a frail, elderly woman. When they brought her inside, I gasped in shock. Though her face was bruised and her arm in a makeshift sling, I recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Abernathy," I exclaimed, "what happened to you?" My elderly neighbor looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Martha, I'm so sorry. After you left, they came back. They hurt me, trying to make me tell you where you'd gone. But I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." As Michael rushed to get the first aid kit, a terrible realization dawned on me. Innocent people were now being hurt because of secrets my father had kept decades ago. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wouldn't end until I found whatever my father had hidden and confronted the demons of his past.
The next morning, Michael called us all to the kitchen table where he had spread out a timeline of events, beginning with my father's involvement with the Donnelly family in the 1950s and ending with Eleanor's death 3 months ago. "We need to work quickly," he said. "Raymond Donnelly is escalating. The attack on Mrs. Abernathy proves he's getting desperate." Mrs. Abernathy, looking better after a night's rest but still shaken, sipped her tea with trembling hands. "They kept asking about a key," she said quietly. "They thought Martha had given me a key to hold for her." "A key?" Mr. Johnson frowned. "What kind of key?" "They didn't say," Mrs. Abernathy replied, "but they tore my apartment apart looking for it." Michael tapped his finger thoughtfully on the timeline. "Your father testified against Victor Donnelly in 1960, the same year Eleanor was born and given up for adoption. The timing can't be coincidental." Something tugged at my memory. A flash of my father sitting at our kitchen table late at night, writing in a small notebook that he quickly hid whenever I entered the room. "Dad kept a journal," I said suddenly. "At least, I think it was a journal. He wrote in it almost every night when I was young. After he died, I asked Mom about it, but she said she'd never seen such a thing." Michael's eyes lit up. "That could be important. Do you have any idea what happened to it?" I shook my head. I always assumed Mom was telling the truth, that I'd imagined it or confused it with something else. "Or she was protecting you by denying its existence," Mr. Johnson suggested. "We need to search your apartment," Michael decided. "If your father left clues about what he hid, that's where they'd be." "But it's not safe," Kate interjected. "Donnelly's men could be watching it." "Which is why we'll go in discreetly," Michael replied. He turned to me. "Mrs. Wilson, is there anything in your apartment that might contain information from your father? Old boxes of family papers, photo albums, anything you inherited when your mother passed away?" I thought for a moment. "There's a trunk in my closet with family keepsakes. Photos, letters, my parents' marriage certificate. I've never gone through it thoroughly." "That's our target," Michael said. "Kate and I will retrieve it tonight." That evening, as Kate and Michael prepared for their mission to my apartment, I sat with Mrs. Abernathy on the cabin's small porch, watching the sun set over the lake. "You know," she said quietly, "I've lived next door to you for 20 years, and I never knew you had a sister." "Neither did I," I replied with a sad smile. "At least not a living one." Mrs. Abernathy patted my hand. "Your parents must have loved you both very much to go to such lengths to protect you." I keep trying to tell myself that, but I can't help feeling betrayed. All these years of lies. When you get to be my age, you learn that the most important thing in life isn't perfect honesty, it's love. Your parents chose a terrible lie to protect the people they loved most. I can't say I wouldn't have done the same. Her words stayed with me as I waited anxiously for Michael and Kate to return. Around midnight,
Their car pulled up the driveway, and they hurried inside with my family trunk. "Any problems?" Mr. Johnson asked as they set the heavy old trunk on the kitchen table. "The apartment was clear," Michael reported, "but there were signs someone had been there since Mrs. Wilson left. Drawers not quite closed, items slightly out of place." "They're looking for the same thing we are," Kate added grimly. With trembling hands, I opened the trunk. The familiar scent of old paper and my mother's lavender sachets wafted up, bringing a rush of memories. I carefully removed layers of family photographs, birthday cards I'd made as a child, my father's war medals, and my mother's wedding veil. At the bottom lay a thick envelope I'd never seen before, marked with my mother's handwriting, "For Martha, to be opened only in case of emergency." "I think this qualifies as an emergency," I said, breaking the seal. Inside was a letter from my mother dated just weeks before her death 5 years ago, and a small brass key taped to the paper. "My dearest Martha," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you've discovered the truth about Eleanor, and the past has caught up with us. I've carried this burden for so many years, wanting to tell you, but afraid of the danger it would bring to your life." Tears filled my eyes as I read my mother's confession, how she and my father had made the heartbreaking decision to separate their daughters, how they had lived in fear for years, and how my father had indeed taken something from the Donnellys as insurance for our family's safety. "Your father kept evidence of all the Donnelly family's crimes, not just Victor's, but generations of illegal activities, including murders that were never solved. He believed that as long as we had this evidence, they wouldn't dare harm us directly." The letter continued, "The key enclosed opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Bridgeport, box 1137. Inside is everything your father collected, enough evidence to put many people away for life, including Raymond Donnelly. I've kept this key hidden all these years, hoping you would never need to use it. But if you're reading this letter, you must use it to protect yourself. The truth is your only weapon now." I looked up from the letter to find everyone staring at the small brass key in my hand. "We need to get to that bank," Michael said firmly. "It won't be that simple," Kate warned. "If Donnelly's men have been watching Martha for any length of time, they'll be watching the bank too." "And we can't go to the police with this," Mr. Johnson added, "not without knowing who might be compromised. The Donnellys have always had officers on their payroll." "Then what do we do?" I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of my parents' decades-long secret. Michael's expression was resolute. "We set a trap. We use what they want to draw them out. All of them, including Raymond Donnelly himself." As Michael began outlining his plan, I couldn't help but wonder if I was about to put myself in the crosshairs of a dangerous criminal organization. But then I thought of Eleanor, spending her whole life separated from her family, only to die just when she was close to finding the truth. I thought of Mrs. Abernathy, hurt because of her connection to me, and I thought of my parents, living with fear and guilt for decades. It was time to end this, not just for my safety, but for justice too long delayed. Michael's plan was both simple and terrifying. I would access the safe deposit box, then leak information through carefully chosen channels that I had found valuable documents and was willing to negotiate their return. The goal was to lure Raymond Donnelly into a controlled meeting where FBI agents, trusted colleagues of Michael's, would be waiting to arrest him. "It's too dangerous," Mr. Johnson protested. "Martha would be putting herself directly in harm's way." "We'll take every precaution," Michael assured him. "Martha will be protected at all times." "I want to do it," I said firmly. "For Eleanor, for my parents, For Mrs. Abernathy, this has to end. 2 days later, our plan was set in motion. Disguised with a gray wig, glasses, and clothes borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy, I entered First National Bank in Bridgeport, accompanied by Kate, posing as my nurse. Michael and his FBI contacts were positioned strategically around the bank and surrounding streets. The bank manager raised no eyebrows when I presented the key and my ID. Safe Deposit Box 1137 hadn't been accessed in over 15 years, but my name was on the account as an authorized user, my father's foresight once again protecting me. In the private viewing room, with Kate standing guard, I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a smaller, sealed letter with my name on it. I opened the letter first. "Dear Martha," my father had written, "if you're reading this, then the precautions your mother and I took weren't enough. I'm sorry for the burden I'm placing on you now. The enclosed documents detail every illegal activity of the Donnelly family from 1952 to 1960, including evidence of 5 murders that law enforcement never solved. I've kept this insurance policy not for revenge, but for protection. Use it wisely. All my love, Dad." With a deep breath, I opened the manila envelope and found exactly what my father had described. Photographs, financial records, names, dates, and locations of crimes spanning nearly a decade. Most damning of all were several photographs of a young Raymond Donnelly participating in what appeared to be a murder. The victim's face was clearly visible. A man I recognized from newspaper clippings as a state prosecutor who had disappeared in 1958, his body never found. "This is it," I whispered to Kate. "This is what they've been looking for all these years." We carefully photographed every document with the small camera Michael had provided, then returned everything to the box, except for one photograph, the one showing Raymond Donnelly with the murdered prosecutor. That we took with us. Back at the cabin, Michael examined the photos we'd taken and whistled low. "This is enough to put Raymond away for life, and probably a dozen other people too." "Now for phase 2, Kate said, all business. Following Michael's instructions, I made a call to a retired detective my father had known, a man who, according to Eleanor's research, had maintained connections with both law enforcement and the criminal underworld. I told him I had found evidence concerning the Donnelly family and was looking to return it to its rightful owners for appropriate compensation. "Word will reach Raymond within hours," Michael predicted after I hung up. He was right. That evening, my cell phone rang with a blocked number. "Mrs. Wilson," a gravelly voice said when I answered, "I understand you have something that belongs to my family." "Mr. Donnelly? Yes, I believe I do. He'd like to meet to discuss terms, just the two of us, tomorrow night." Following Michael's coaching, I countered with a public location and an earlier time. After some negotiation, we agreed on noon the next day at a popular restaurant in the city center. "You won't need to bring all the materials, just a sample to verify authenticity. Then we can discuss a price."
After hanging up, I looked at the determined faces around me. "He took the bait. Now we prepare," Michael said grimly. The next morning was a flurry of activity. I was fitted with a concealed wire and given a panic button disguised as a pendant. Michael and Kate drilled me repeatedly on the conversation script, contingency plans, and emergency signals. "Remember," Michael said as we prepared to leave for the meeting, "Raymond Donnelly is a cornered animal. That makes him unpredictable and dangerous. Stick to the plan and don't try to improvise." Mr. Johnson, who would remain at the cabin with Mrs. Abernathy, hugged me tightly. "Your sister would be proud of you," he said. "So would your parents." As our car approached the restaurant, I spotted several unmarked police vehicles and plainclothes officers in strategic positions. Michael gave me a reassuring nod. "We've got eyes on you the whole time. The moment he incriminates himself, we move in."
Inside the busy restaurant, I was escorted to a private dining area in the back. Raymond Donnelly was already seated, a glass of scotch in his hand, despite the early hour. He looked exactly like his photograph, an older, harder version of the young man who had murdered a prosecutor decades ago. The spiderweb tattoo on his wrist was clearly visible. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, rising slightly as I approached. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from him, placing my purse on the table, positioned precisely as Michael had instructed, so the hidden camera could capture Donnelly's face. "I must say," Donnelly continued with a cold smile, "you look remarkably like your mother. I met her once, you know. Lovely woman, very devoted to your father." The casual mention of my mother sent a chill through me, but I maintained my composure. "Let's skip the small talk, Mr. Donnelly. I have what you've been looking for all these years." His smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "And what exactly do you think that is?" I carefully removed the photograph from an envelope and slid it across the table, making sure to handle it only by the edges as Michael had instructed. Donnelly glanced at it, his expression unchanging, but I noticed a slight tremor in his hand as he picked it up. "Interesting," he said flatly. "A fake, obviously. Where did you get it?" "It's not a fake, and there's much more where that came from. Financial records, names, dates. Enough to put you away for the rest of your life." "If these materials actually existed," Donnelly said, his voice dangerously low, "what would prevent me from simply taking them from you? Or eliminating the problem entirely?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because they're secured in a way that if anything happens to me, they go directly to the FBI, the state prosecutor's office, and 3 major newspapers. My sister Eleanor, or Caroline Fuller as she was known most of her life, was my sister. The sister my parents had to give up to protect her from you. She spent years tracking down my father's evidence, and before you could silence her, she made sure I would find it." A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I leaned forward. "Eleanor, or Caroline Fuller as she was known most of her life, was my sister. The sister my parents had to give up to protect her from you. She spent years tracking down my father's evidence, and before you could silence her, she made sure I would find it." Donnelly's composure cracked slightly. "That interfering old woman was your sister? I had no idea." He laughed softly. "Small world." His casual admission of knowing Eleanor, and by implication his involvement in her death, was exactly what we needed. I could almost feel Michael and the FBI team preparing to move in. "Let's discuss terms," I said, maintaining the script. "I want $5 million for the complete set of documents." "That's quite steep," Donnelly replied, regaining his calm. "How do I know you'll deliver everything?" "You don't," I said simply, "but it's your only option if you want to stay out of prison." Donnelly studied me for a long moment, then smiled, a genuine smile that somehow seemed more frightening than his previous cold one. "You know, your father made me the same offer once, right before he went to the FBI. $5 million for his silence and the evidence. I refused then. I wonder if I made a mistake." He reached slowly into his jacket, and for a terrifying moment I thought he was drawing a gun. Instead, he removed a checkbook. $5 million, you said. I can give you a down payment today, with the balance upon delivery of all materials." As he began writing the check, an act that would further incriminate him, I heard Michael's voice through my concealed earpiece. "We've got enough. Coming in now." Seconds later, the restaurant erupted with activity as FBI agents swarmed our private dining area. "Raymond Donnelly, you are under arrest," announced the lead agent, a stern-faced woman who moved with practiced efficiency. The look Donnelly gave me as they handcuffed him burned with such hatred that I had to look away. "This isn't over," he hissed as they led him out. "Not by a long shot." As I watched them take him away, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and hollow sadness. We had succeeded.
The man who had terrorized my family for generations was finally facing justice, but it wouldn't bring back Eleanor or erase the decades of fear and separation my family had endured. Michael appeared at my side, his face serious despite our success. "We need to move quickly," he said. "Raymond might be in custody, but his organization is still out there, and they won't be happy." Back in the car, as we sped away from the restaurant, Michael explained the next phase. Raymond will be held without bail, given the severity of the charges and his flight risk, but his associates will be scrambling now, either to help him or to take his place. "So it's still not over," I said, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to fade. "Not quite," Michael admitted, "but we've dealt them a serious blow, and we have one more card to play." When we returned to the cabin, Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Abernathy were waiting anxiously for news. As I recounted what had happened, Mr. Johnson's phone rang.
Mr. Johnson answered his phone, his expression shifting from concern to surprise as he listened. "I see. Yes, she's right here." He handed the phone to me. "It's the FBI director. He wants to speak with you personally." With trembling hands, I took the phone. "Hello?" "Mrs. Wilson?" came an authoritative voice. "I want to personally thank you for your courage today. Raymond Donnelly has been a thorn in our side for decades. The evidence you provided gives us everything we need to dismantle his entire organization." "Thank you, sir," I replied, still processing the magnitude of what we'd accomplished. "There's something else," the director continued. "Your father, Thomas Wilson, wasn't just an accountant who got in over his head. He was working with us from the beginning, an undercover financial analyst helping build the case against the Donnelly family." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My father was an FBI agent? Not officially, no, but one of our most valuable confidential informants. His work saved lives and helped us prosecute dozens of dangerous criminals. The decision to fake your sister's death and separate your family was partly our recommendation, a desperate measure we don't take lightly. As the director continued explaining, pieces of my childhood suddenly made new sense. My father's mysterious late-night phone calls, the strangers who occasionally visited him at odd hours, his insistence on teaching me to be observant and cautious. "We failed your family," the director admitted. "We should have provided better protection. But thanks to your actions today, we can finally close this chapter. A protective detail will remain with you until all of Raymond's associates are in custody." After ending the call, I shared the revelation with the others. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I suspected something like that. Your father's documentation was too thorough, too professional to be the work of an ordinary accountant." "So, my father was a hero?" I said softly, tears forming in my eyes. "All these years, I thought he was just an accountant who got mixed up with the wrong people. He was protecting his country and his family. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose stories are never told," Mrs. Abernathy said, patting my hand. That evening, as we ate dinner together in the cabin's small kitchen, a strange sense of family had formed among us. Mr. Johnson with his legal expertise, Kate with her quiet vigilance, Michael with his protective presence, and dear Mrs. Abernathy, who had suffered for her connection to me. We were united by the events of the past few days and by the secrets that had finally come to light. Just as we were finishing our meal, Michael's phone rang. His expression darkened as he listened. "When? How many?" After hanging up, he turned to us with grim determination. "3 of Raymond's top lieutenants have escaped the FBI roundup. They were seen heading in this direction an hour ago." "How could they know where we are?" Mr. Johnson demanded. "Raymond must have had a contingency plan," Michael replied, already moving to check the windows and doors. "Or someone inside the FBI tipped them off." "What do we do?" I asked, fear creeping back despite our earlier victory. "We need to move now," Michael said decisively. "Kate, get Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Johnson to the secondary safe house. I'll take Martha to the evidence vault at FBI headquarters. We need to secure those documents permanently."
As Kate hurried Mrs. Abernathy toward one of the cars, I quickly gathered my few belongings, including my mother's letter and the empty envelope that had held the safe deposit key. Something about the envelope caught my attention. It seemed heavier than it should be, with a slight bulge in one corner. Examining it more closely, I discovered a hidden compartment in the envelope's lining. Inside was a small data drive, no bigger than my thumbnail, along with a note in my mother's handwriting. The complete digital backup. Your father was always thinking ahead. Michael, I called, showing him my discovery. There's more evidence here. He examined the tiny drive with amazement. This could contain everything we need. Let's go. We hurried to the second car, but as we started down the gravel driveway, headlights appeared through the trees ahead, blocking our exit. Too late, Michael muttered, quickly reversing. We'll have to go out the back way, through the woods. Abandoning the car near the cabin, Michael led me into the dense forest behind the property. The night was dark, with only a sliver of moon providing scant illumination as we navigated between trees and fallen logs. Stay close, Michael whispered, drawing his gun. There's an old surface road about a half-mile through these woods. If we can reach it, I have a colleague who can pick us up. We moved as quietly as possible, but in the stillness of the night, every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Behind us, I could hear voices and see flashlights being sweeping through the trees. Raymond's men had found the cabin and were now searching for us. They're getting closer, I whispered, panic rising in my chest. We're almost there, Michael assured me. Suddenly, a shout went up behind us. There, through the trees. Run, Michael ordered, pushing me ahead as he turned to face our pursuers. I sprinted forward, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. The sound of gunfire erupted behind me, short, controlled bursts that echoed through the forest. I wanted to stop, to make sure Michael was all right, but his urgent command rang in my ears. Don't stop. Get to the road. Breaking through the tree line, I found myself on a narrow dirt road, exactly as Michael had described. But there was no sign of our rescue, and I was alone in the darkness, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. In desperation, I looked for somewhere to hide. Across the road was a steep embankment leading down to what looked like a small stream. Without hesitation, I scrambled down, losing my footing halfway and sliding the rest of the way on my back. At the bottom, I pressed myself against the muddy bank, trying to control my breathing, as footsteps pounded along the road above me. Flashlight beams swept over the area, occasionally illuminating the rushing water inches from my feet. She came this way, a gruff voice called. Spread out and find her. I clutched the tiny data drive in my hand, knowing it contained evidence that could put dozens of dangerous criminals away for life. If they found me, they would kill me for it without hesitation. The footsteps moved away, and for a moment I thought they had passed me by. Then a shower of dirt and small rocks cascaded down as someone began descending the embankment directly above me. Holding my breath, I eased myself sideways, trying to stay in the shadows. My foot slipped, sending a small splash into the stream. The flashlight beam swung in my direction.
I think I found something, the man called to his companions. This was it. In seconds, they would discover me. I closed my eyes, thinking of Eleanor, of my parents, of all the secrets and sacrifices that had led to this moment. Then came the unmistakable sound of a helicopter, its powerful searchlights suddenly illuminating the entire area with blinding intensity. FBI, boomed a voice over a loudspeaker. Drop your weapons. You are surrounded. The man on the embankment froze, then turned to flee, only to be caught in the helicopter's spotlight. Multiple FBI agents emerged from the trees, weapons drawn. In moments, Raymond's men were face down on the ground, being handcuffed. A familiar figure appeared at the top of the embankment.
Michael, his arm bleeding but otherwise intact. "Martha," he called, "are you all right?" "I'm here," I shouted back, relief flooding through me. "I'm okay." As agents helped me climb back up to the road, Michael explained that Kate had called for backup the moment they discovered we were being followed. The helicopter had been monitoring the area from a distance, waiting for the right moment to intervene. "Your father would be proud," Michael said, as medics attended to his wound. "You showed the same courage he did all those years ago." Looking around at the captured men who had terrorized my family for generations, I finally felt the weight of decades of secrets beginning to lift. My sister Eleanor had died searching for the truth, but her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Together, we had finished what our father had started, bringing justice to those who had torn our family apart. As dawn broke over the trees, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I knew that while I couldn't change the past, I could honor it. Eleanor's inheritance, both the financial wealth she had left me and the legacy of truth she had pursued, would not be wasted. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free from the shadows that had haunted my family for so long. But as I watched Raymond's men being led away, a nagging question remained. Was this truly the end of the Donnelly thread, or merely the closing of one chapter in a story that had spanned generations?
3 months after Raymond Donnelly's arrest, life had begun to settle into a new normal. With the FBI's help, I had moved to a quiet coastal town in Maine, far from Boston and the memories of danger that lingered there. The $7 million from Eleanor's estate had been transferred to my accounts, and though I had offered to share it with Mrs. Abernathy for all she had endured, she had refused anything more than enough to repair her apartment. "What you gave me was worth more than money," she had said during her visit last weekend. "You gave me adventure in my golden years. Now I have stories to tell at the senior center that no one will believe." Her resilience amazed me. She had returned to her apartment in Boston, proudly showing off the small scar on her forehead as her battle wound, and regaling neighbors with heavily edited versions of our ordeal. I had purchased a small cottage overlooking the Atlantic where I spent my mornings watching the waves and my afternoons volunteering at the local library. Mr. Johnson called weekly to update me on the legal proceedings against Raymond and his organization. The evidence from my father's safe deposit box and the digital backup had led to over 30 arrests and the seizure of millions in criminal assets. "Raymond will never see the outside of a prison again," Mr. Johnson had assured me during our last call. "He's facing multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole." Yet despite these reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unresolved. Perhaps it was the way Raymond had looked at me during his arrest, the hatred burning in his eyes, or perhaps it was simply the lingering habit of caution ingrained by recent events. Michael and Kate had returned to their regular FBI duties, but stayed in touch. Michael had even visited twice, ostensibly to check on my security, but lingering for conversations that stretched into evening walks along the beach. I found myself looking forward to these visits more than I cared to admit. On a crisp October morning, as I sorted through the last of Eleanor's personal effects that Mr. Johnson had forwarded to me, I discovered a leather-bound journal I hadn't seen before. Inside, in Eleanor's neat handwriting, were detailed accounts of her search for the truth about our family. The early entries described her shock at learning she was adopted, her gradual discovery of her true identity, and her first attempts to locate me. As I read further, I was struck by her determination and courage, qualities I had come to recognize in myself during our ordeal. One entry in particular caught my attention. May 15, 2020.
I've made a disturbing discovery. The Donnelly organization may be more extensive than anyone realizes. Through my research, I've found connections to legitimate businesses, politicians, even law enforcement agencies across multiple states. Raymond may be the visible head, but I suspect there's a shadow network that operates independently of his direct control. If something happens to him, this network will continue functioning. I need to find concrete evidence of these connections before approaching Martha. A chill ran through me as I read these words. Had we only cut off the head of the snake, leaving its body intact? I immediately called Michael to share my concerns. Eleanor might have been onto something, he admitted after I read him the journal entry. We've been tracking financial transactions linked to the Donnellys, and some lead to shell companies that seem to operate independently of Raymond's direct control. So it's not over? I said, my heart sinking. It's not that simple, Michael replied. We've dealt them a serious blow, but organizations like this have deep roots. I'll have our financial crimes unit look into Eleanor's research notes more thoroughly. After hanging up, I walked to the beach, Eleanor's journal clutched in my hand. The wind whipped my hair as I stared out at the endless horizon. Perhaps complete closure was too much to hope for. Perhaps some shadows from the past would always linger. As I turned to head back to the cottage, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked on the road above, a black sedan with tinted windows. It could be nothing, of course. Tourists often parked along this stretch to admire the view, but years of caution made me take a less direct route home, climbing the coastal path that offered more cover. From a vantage point in the rocks, I observed the sedan. A man sat behind the wheel, apparently watching my cottage. When he briefly lowered his window, I caught a glimpse of something on his wrist. Not the spiderweb tattoo I feared, but something equally deliberate and designed. I called Michael immediately. "There's someone watching my house," I whispered, describing the man and the sedan. "Get to a safe location," he instructed. "I'll contact the local FBI field office. They can have someone there in 20 minutes. I retreated further along the coastal path, finding shelter in a small cave formed by the erosion of the cliffs. From here, I could watch without being seen. The man eventually exited his vehicle and approached my cottage cautiously, circling it once before trying to peer through the windows.
True to Michael's word, within 20 minutes, an unmarked car pulled up behind the sedan. Two agents emerged, identifying themselves to the man, who seemed surprised but not particularly alarmed. After a brief conversation, they escorted him to their vehicle. When I finally returned to the cottage, escorted by the agents, I learned that the man claimed to be a private investigator hired by someone named Caroline Fuller, Eleanor's adopted name. He says he was hired over a year ago to locate Martha Wilson and deliver information to her, one of the agents explained. He's been trying to find you since the address he had is no longer current. What information? I asked, wary of another trap. The agent handed me a sealed envelope that had been in the investigator's possession. We've examined it. It appears to be legitimate, just papers and a small key. Alone in my cottage after the agents departed, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from Eleanor, dated just weeks before her death, along with a small key that looked like it might fit a storage unit or another safe deposit box. "Dear Martha," Eleanor had written, "if you're reading this, then my worst fears have been realized. I've arranged for this letter to be delivered to you if I don't check in with my investigator for more than 3 months. The enclosed key opens storage unit number 217 at Secure Storage in Cambridge. Inside, you'll find everything I've discovered about Donnelly Organization's extended network, information too dangerous to keep in my home. Be careful who you trust with this information. The corruption reaches further than you might imagine.
I'm sorry I couldn't share this with you in person. Know that finding you, my sister, gave meaning to my life after so many years of searching. With all my love, Eleanor. Caroline. I sat with the letter in my trembling hands, the weight of Eleanor's final message settling over me. Just when I thought the danger had passed, here was evidence that our work wasn't finished, that Eleanor had uncovered an even deeper layer to the conspiracy that had torn our family apart. I called Michael immediately, sharing what I'd found. "Don't go to that storage unit alone," he warned. "I can be there tomorrow. We'll go together, with backup." That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. What had Eleanor discovered that was so dangerous she couldn't keep it in her home? And more importantly, who else might know about this storage unit and the secrets it contained? As dawn broke over the Atlantic, I made a decision. I wouldn't spend my life looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. Whatever Eleanor had found, whatever danger still lurked, I would face them head on, not just for my safety, but for justice, for Eleanor, for my parents, for the truth that had cost our family so dearly. Michael arrived that afternoon, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you sure you want to pursue this?" he asked, as we sat on my porch. "You've been through enough already. The FBI can handle the investigation from here." I showed him Eleanor's journal, open to an entry I had discovered the previous night. The truth isn't just about justice for our family. It's about protecting countless others who don't even know they're in danger. If I've learned anything from my research, it's that silence and secrecy are the allies of corruption. The light of truth, however painful, is the only real protection any of us have. "Eleanor was right," I said quietly. "I can't walk away now knowing there's more to uncover. I owe her that much. I owe myself that much." Michael nodded slowly. "Then we'll do this together, but we'll do it right. Carefully, methodically, with proper protection." As we watched the sun setting over the ocean, casting long shadows across the beach, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. The shadows of the past weren't finished with me yet, but neither was I finished with them. Eleanor had started this journey decades ago, and now it fell to me to complete it. Whatever secrets awaited in storage unit number 217, I would face them with the same courage that had guided my sister, my father, and now me. The truth, as Eleanor had written, was our only real protection, and I was finally ready to embrace it, whatever the cost.
Inside the courtroom, I was escorted to a seat near the front. Raymond Donnelly sat at the defense table, his once imposing figure now diminished in prison attire. When he turned and saw me, his eyes flickered to the locket at my throat, then back to my face. For a moment, I saw something unexpected in his expression, not hatred or anger, but a wearied resignation. He looked older than his years, a man finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of wrong choices. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. The prosecution detailed Raymond's crimes: murder, racketeering, witness tampering, money laundering, a litany of offenses spanning decades. When it came time for sentencing, the judge spoke directly to Raymond. "Mr. Donnelly, your criminal enterprise has caused immeasurable harm to countless individuals and to the fabric of our society. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." As the sentence was pronounced, Raymond remained impassive. But when given the opportunity to speak, he surprised everyone by turning toward me. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice raspy but clear, "your father was an honorable man. I didn't understand that until it was too late. What began as a simple financial arrangement with your father became an obsession that consumed my life and destroyed yours. For that, I am sorry." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom at this unexpected apology. As Raymond was led away in handcuffs, our eyes met one final time. In that moment, I felt something shift within me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release. the monster who had haunted my family for generations, was in the end just a man, a prisoner of his own making long before he ever entered a cell. Outside the courthouse, as reporters clamored for statements, Michael guided me through the crowd to a waiting car. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was true. For the first time in months, maybe for the first time in my life, I feel like I can breathe freely. As our car pulled away from the courthouse, I touched Eleanor's locket, thinking of all she had sacrificed to bring us to this moment. The journey wasn't over. The network she had uncovered would take years to fully dismantle, but the heaviest burden, the secrets, the fear, the uncertainty, had finally been lifted. "What will you do now?" asked Michael as we drove through the streets of Boston, the city where this story had begun so many decades ago. I looked out at passing buildings, thinking of my quiet cottage in Maine, of Eleanor's research, of all the threads of my life that had led to this moment. "I'm going to tell our story," I said. "Eleanor's and mine, my parents, all of it. The truth deserves to be known." Michael smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I think Eleanor would approve." As we headed north toward Maine, I felt Eleanor's presence beside me, as if the sister I had never known was finally accompanying me home. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I was ready to face it without the shadows of the past obscuring my view. The inheritance Eleanor had left me wasn't just the money or the evidence she had painstakingly gathered. It was the truth, painful, complicated, but ultimately liberating. And in that truth, I had found not only justice, but also something I'd never expected, peace.
The drive to Cambridge the next morning was tense with anticipation. Michael had arranged for an FBI evidence team to meet us at secure storage, along with additional agents for security. As we pulled into the facility's parking lot, I noticed several unmarked vehicles already in position. "We're taking every precaution," Michael explained, noting my nervous glance. "The team has secured the perimeter, and we verified that no one has accessed the unit since Eleanor rented it." The facility manager, a thin man with perpetually raised eyebrows, led us through rows of identical metal doors until we reached unit number 217. He seemed both intimidated and intrigued by the FBI presence. "It's been paid up for 3 years in advance," he informed us. "Miss Fuller was very particular about that." With gloved hands, I inserted Eleanor's key into the lock. It turned smoothly, and the heavy door rolled upward to reveal a space about the size of a small bedroom. Inside, neatly organized on metal shelving units, were dozens of labeled file boxes, several locked briefcases, and what appeared to be computer equipment covered with dust cloths. "Eleanor was thorough," Michael murmured, clearly impressed by the scope of my sister's investigation. The evidence team moved in, photographing everything before carefully removing items for examination. A female agent set up a portable workstation to access the computer equipment on site. "This will take time," she explained. "We need to preserve the chain of evidence and ensure we don't miss anything." As the team worked, I wandered the narrow space, running my fingers along the boxes. Each was meticulously labeled with dates, names, and subject matter. Donnelly Financial Networks, 2010-2015, read one. Political Connections, Northeastern States, read another. In the back corner, a smaller box caught my attention. Unlike the others, it bore no label, only a small heart drawn in red marker. Something about it felt personal, meant specifically for me. Inside, I found photographs, dozens of them spanning decades. There was Eleanor at various ages, graduating college, on vacation, at what appeared to be her wedding. She had documented her life in pictures, creating the family album we never got to share. Beneath these personal photographs was a sealed envelope with my name on it and a small velvet pouch. The envelope contained another letter. "Martha, these are the memories I wish we could have shared. I hope they help you know me a little better. The locket and the pouch belonged to our mother.
Dad gave it to me when I turned 18 and learned the truth. Inside is a picture of the four of us, the only family photo that exists with all of us together, taken the day before they sent me away. I've worn it every day of my adult life. Now it should be yours. Tears blurred my vision as I opened the locket and found a delicate gold locket. With trembling fingers, I pressed the tiny clasp. Inside, just as Eleanor had described, was a miniature photograph of our family. My father looking young and serious, my mother holding an infant Eleanor, and me as a toddler clutching my father's hand. We looked happy, normal, unaware of the separation that would come the very next day. I was still holding the locket when the female agent called out from her computer station. "You need to see this," she said urgently to Michael. "We've accessed the main database Ms. Fuller created. It's extensive." Michael and I gathered around the screen as she navigated through folder after folder of meticulously organized evidence. Eleanor had created a comprehensive map of the Donnelly organization's extended network. Businesses, political connections, law enforcement contacts, even judges and prosecutors who had been compromised. "This goes beyond Massachusetts," Michael said, his expression grim. "There are connections in New York, Chicago, even Washington, D.C. "Look at this," the agent said, pointing to a folder labeled Operation Hermes. Inside were documents detailing what appeared to be a massive money laundering operation involving several seemingly legitimate investment firms, including one that managed pension funds for 3 state governments. "If this is accurate," Michael said slowly, "it's one of the largest organized crime infiltrations of public finance I've ever seen." As the team continued to process Eleanor's evidence, a pattern emerged. Raymond Donnelly was just one head of a multi-headed hydra. The organization had evolved over decades, embedding itself within legitimate businesses and institutions, creating a network that could survive the loss of any single leader. "Eleanor must have been getting close to exposing all of this," I said, understanding at last why she had been targeted. "That's why they killed her." By late afternoon, the FBI had removed all materials from the storage unit and transported them to a secure facility for further analysis. Michael insisted on taking me to a hotel rather than returning to my cottage in Maine. "Until we know exactly what we're dealing with, it's safer if you stay under protection," he explained. That evening, in my guarded hotel room, I finally had time to process everything we'd discovered. I sat by the window, holding Eleanor's locket and watching the lights of Cambridge flicker to life as darkness fell. My phone rang, Mr. Johnson calling for an update. I explained what we'd found and the scope of Eleanor's investigation. "Your sister was remarkable," he said, when I finished. "To have uncovered so much on her own with no official resources or protection." "She was," I agreed, a fresh wave of grief washing over me for the relationship we never had, a lifetime of conversations and shared experiences lost to us. "There's something else you should know," Mr. Johnson continued, his tone becoming more serious. "The court has scheduled Raymond Donnelly's sentencing for next Monday. His attorney has requested that you be present." "Me? Why would they want me there?" "It's unusual," Mr. Johnson admitted, "but the judge has granted the request, given your central role in the case. You're not obligated to attend, of course." After we hung up, I called Michael to share this development. "It could be a tactic to intimidate you," he warned, "or perhaps Raymond wants to make some kind of statement for the record." "I want to go," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my decision. "I need to look him in the eye one last time, for Eleanor, for my parents, for myself." Michael was silent for a moment. "If you're certain, we'll arrange maximum security. Raymond will be in custody, but we can't rule out that he still has people on the outside." The next few days passed in a blur of FBI debriefings as agents worked through Eleanor's evidence. The scope of the conspiracy she had uncovered grew increasingly clear and increasingly disturbing. Several high-ranking officials had already been quietly removed from their positions pending investigation. On Monday morning, I dressed carefully for Raymond Donnelly's sentencing, a simple navy dress that Eleanor might have worn, the gold locket visible at my throat. Michael accompanied me to the courthouse, which was surrounded by security personnel and media vans. "Stay close to me," he murmured as we navigated through reporters shouting questions about the Donnelly crime network that had become front-page news.
1 year later, I stood on the porch of my cottage, watching the autumn leaves dance across the lawn on their way to the sea. The brisk October air carried the scent of salt and the distant call of seagulls, a peaceful contrast to the turmoil that had defined the previous year. Eleanor's evidence had sparked one of the largest organized crime investigations in FBI history. Over 300 arrests had been made across 12 states, dismantling the network she had so carefully mapped. Corrupt officials had been removed from office, illicit businesses shuttered, and stolen funds recovered. The Donnelly organization, which had terrorized my family for generations, was now nothing more than case files and newspaper headlines. Inside my cottage, on the desk where I spent most mornings, sat the manuscript I had just finished. The sister I never knew, a family divided by crime, united by truth. It had taken me months to write, to find the words to honor Eleanor's memory and tell our family's story. A publisher in New York had expressed interest, and Mr. Johnson was handling the legal aspects of the contract. Michael visited regularly, our professional relationship having evolved into something deeper during the long months of the investigation. He had recently accepted a teaching position at a nearby college, training the next generation of law enforcement officers. Though he never said it directly, I knew he had chosen the position partly to be closer to me. The inheritance from Eleanor had allowed me to establish a foundation in her name, dedicated to supporting children separated from their families due to violence or criminal activity. The Eleanor Wilson Foundation had already helped dozens of families navigate the complex process of reunion and healing. As I prepared for an afternoon meeting with the Foundation's board of directors, my phone rang. It was Kate, who had become a good friend since our ordeal together. "Have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "No. What's happened?" "Raymond Donnelly died in prison last night. Heart attack." I sat down slowly, absorbing this final chapter in the Donnelly saga. "How do you feel about it?" Kate asked gently. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel something. Relief, perhaps? Or satisfaction. But mostly I just feel sad for all the lives he destroyed, including his own." After hanging up, I walked to the small garden I had planted in Eleanor's memory. Autumn flowers bloomed in rich purples and golds, her favorite colors, according to the notes she had left about herself. In the center stood a simple stone bench engraved with words from her journal. "The truth, however painful, is the only path to freedom." I sat on the bench, thinking about Raymond Donnelly and the legacy of fear he had created. With his death, the last direct link to my family's painful past was gone. The man who had ordered my sister into hiding, who had forced my parents to live a lie, who had ultimately taken Eleanor's life, was no more. Yet the ripples of his actions continued, in the lives he had damaged, in the family connections severed, in the years of separation that could never be reclaimed. Some wounds, I had learned, never fully heal. They simply become part of who you are. That evening, as Michael and I walked along the beach at sunset, I told him about Raymond's death. "Does it change anything for you?" he asked, his arm warm around my shoulders against the cooling air. I considered the question carefully. I said,
It closes a chapter, but the story doesn't end with him. It continues with us, with how we choose to live in the aftermath. We pause to watch the waves lapping against the shore, constant and rhythmic. "I found something yesterday," I said, reaching into my pocket while going through the last of Eleanor's personal effects. I handed him a small, weathered photograph. It showed Eleanor as a young woman, standing on this very beach, arms outstretched to the sea, her face alight with joy. "There's a note on the back," I said. Michael turned the photograph over to read Eleanor's neat handwriting. "Maine Coast, 1989. Found the most beautiful place in the world today. Someday I'll bring Martha here." "She knew about this place," I said softly. "She might have even stood exactly where we're standing now, 30 years ago." "Perhaps she led you here," Michael suggested, in her own way. The thought brought unexpected comfort, the idea that Eleanor had somehow guided me to this peaceful spot, that our paths had crossed in ways I hadn't recognized. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared over the Atlantic, I thought about the strange journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I had been a solitary woman of 78, living a quiet life in Boston, believing I was alone in the world. Now I stood transformed, a sister, a witness, a keeper of truth, surrounded by new friends and purpose. The inheritance Eleanor had left me wasn't just the money or the evidence that had toppled a criminal empire. It was the gift of identity, of family history, of connections I never knew existed. It was the knowledge that I was part of something larger than myself, a story of courage, sacrifice, and ultimately justice. Back at the cottage, as Michael built a fire in the hearth, I opened Eleanor's locket once more to gaze at the only family photo we would ever have together. In the flickering firelight, the faces of my parents and the baby sister I had believed dead seemed to come alive, as if reaching across time to connect with me at last. "I've been thinking," I said, closing the locket and turning to Michael, "about what comes next. The foundation is established, the book is finished, the Donnelly organization is gone. And," he prompted gently, "I want to find the others, children like Eleanor and me, separated by violence or crime, who never knew what happened to their families. There must be so many of them out there, still wondering, still searching." Michael smiled, taking my hand in his. "I think that's a perfect next chapter." As the fire crackled and the autumn wind whispered around the corners of the cottage, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The journey hadn't been easy, and the cost had been terribly high, but in finding Eleanor, even too late, I had also found myself. The mystery of the miras abogado, the inheritance attorney, had led me not just to financial wealth, but to the richer inheritance of truth, purpose, and connection. Though Eleanor and I had been separated by lies and danger for most of our lives, in the end, her final gift to me had been freedom from the shadows that had haunted our family for generations. As I drifted to sleep that night, the locket resting over my heart, I dreamed not of danger or pursuit, but of two sisters walking hand in hand along a sunlit beach, making up for lost time in the endless conversations of dreams. We walked together, Eleanor and I, as if the decades of separation had never happened. In my dream, we shared stories of our lives, laughed at the similarities we discovered,
and cried for the years we had lost.
When I awoke the next morning, the dream lingered like a comforting presence. Though Eleanor was gone in body, I had come to feel her spirit alongside me in every decision I made, every new path I explored. Over breakfast, I shared my idea with Michael in more detail, creating a specialized division within the Eleanor Wilson Foundation dedicated to reuniting families separated by criminal activity. We could work with law enforcement agencies, I explained, excitement building as the vision took shape. Use DNA databases, hire investigators with experience in cold cases. Think of how many families might find closure. Michael listened intently, adding suggestions from his own experience. The FBI has files on thousands of cases involving family separations due to witness protection, criminal threats, or missing persons. Many of those cases were never resolved because the danger remained active. But now, decades later, some of those threats may be gone, I continued, finishing his thought. The perpetrators might be deceased or imprisoned. Those families might safely reunite if they only knew where to look. By midday, we had drafted a preliminary plan. Michael would reach out to former colleagues at the FBI to discuss potential collaboration, while I would present the initiative to the Foundation's Board of Directors at our meeting that afternoon. As I prepared my presentation, I felt a sense of purpose that transcended my personal journey. What happened to Eleanor and me wasn't unique. Throughout history, countless families have been torn apart by violence, crime, and fear. Each separation represented a wound in the social fabric, a story interrupted, connections severed. The board unanimously approved the new initiative, allocating substantial resources to what we decided to call Project Reunion. Within weeks, we had assembled a team of investigators, genealogists, and counselors specialized in family trauma and reconnection. Our first success came 3 months later, reuniting a 65-year-old woman with her younger brother, who had been placed in foster care and later adopted when their parents were murdered by a drug cartel in 1970. The siblings had spent over 50 years believing they were alone in the world, each unaware the other had survived. Watching their tearful reunion, I saw echoes of what might have been for Eleanor and me had fate been kinder. Yet instead of bitterness, I felt a profound sense of validation. Though Eleanor and I had never experienced that moment of reunion, we were creating it for others, a living legacy more powerful than grief. As Project Reunion grew, so did my relationship with Michael. Our shared mission and the quiet rhythms of coastal life had drawn us closer than either of us had anticipated. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, he took my hand. "Martha," he said softly, "I know we came together under extraordinary circumstances, but these past months have been the happiest of my life." I smiled, feeling the same unexpected joy that had gradually replaced the sorrow and fear of the previous year. "Mine too," I admitted. "I'm not sure what the protocol is for two people our age, but I'd like to make this arrangement more permanent if you're amenable." "Are you proposing, Agent Reeves?" I asked, surprising myself with the playfulness in my voice. "I believe I am, Mrs. Wilson. Though I must warn you, I come with a retirement pension and a tendency to analyze suspicious behavior in grocery store lines." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in decades. Those seem like acceptable terms. We were married the following spring in a small ceremony on the beach with Mrs. Abernathy, Mr. Johnson, Kate, and our colleagues from the foundation in attendance. I wore a simple blue dress and Eleanor's locket, feeling her presence as strongly as any of the physical guests. That summer, as Project Reunion continued its work, I received a letter from a prison in Pennsylvania. The return address bore a name I didn't recognize, but the contents left me speechless. "Dear Mrs. Wilson, you don't know me, but I was Raymond Donnelly's cellmate during his final months. In his last weeks, he spoke often about you and your sister.
He asked me to tell you that before he died, he provided information to the FBI about 3 other families that were separated because of his organization's activities in the 1960s and 70s. He said it wouldn't make up for what he did to your family, but it was the only amends he could offer. He also wanted you to know that your father was the only man who ever stood up to him and lived to tell about it, until you. I shared the letter with Michael, who confirmed through his FBI contacts that Raymond had indeed provided this information shortly before his death. The cases were already being investigated, with promising leads on all 3 families.
It seems even Raymond Donnelly found some measure of redemption in the end, Michael observed. Not redemption, I corrected gently, but perhaps recognition of the damage he caused. It's something, at least. As the 2nd anniversary of Eleanor's inheritance approached, I completed a pilgrimage I had been planning for months. With Michael beside me, I visited the cemetery in Chicago, where Eleanor had been buried under her adopted name, Carolyn Fuller. The granite headstone was simple but elegant, much like Eleanor herself. Michael stood back respectfully as I placed a bouquet of her favorite flowers and a small framed copy of our only family photograph at the base of the stone. "Hello, sister," I said softly, touching the cool granite. "I wish we could have met in life, but you've been with me every step of this journey nonetheless. Your courage changed everything, not just for me, but for so many others." I told her about Project Reunion, about the families we had already helped, about the legacy that would continue in her name. As I spoke, a gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, and a single golden leaf spiraled down to land beside the photograph. "I think she heard you," Michael said, as we walked back to the car, his arms supportive around my waist. "I think she's been listening all along," I replied. That night, in our hotel room, I made a decision that had been forming in my mind for some time. "I want to legally change my name," I told Michael. "Not completely, just to add Eleanor's name to mine. Martha Eleanor Wilson Reeves, a way of reclaiming the connection we should have had all along." Michael smiled, understanding, as always. "I think it's perfect." Back in Maine, as autumn painted the landscape in vibrant colors once more, I sat at my desk to write the epilogue for my book. The manuscript had grown beyond my initial vision, incorporating not just my family story, but also the broader impact of organized crime on innocent families throughout the decades. The inheritance my sister left me was far more than money or evidence. It was truth, purpose, and a second chance at family. Not the one that was taken from us, but a new one we create through choice and love. Eleanor showed me that even the darkest secrets, once brought into the light, lose their power to harm. In sharing our story, I hope others find the courage to seek their own truths, however painful, and to believe that it's never too late for healing to begin. As I finished writing, I looked up to see Michael standing in the doorway, a gentle smile on his face. Beyond him, through the window, I could see the ocean stretching to the horizon, constant, eternal, yet ever-changing, like life itself. The journey that had begun with a shocking revelation in an attorney's office had transformed me in ways I could never have imagined. At 79 years old, I had found not an ending, but a new beginning, proof that it's never too late to discover who you truly are and what you're meant to do in this world. Eleanor's inheritance had given me far more than wealth or justice. It had given me a second life, one filled with purpose, love, and the profound peace that comes from finally stepping out of the shadows and into the light of truth.